I'm going to run through some of the items from the last meeting that were here. Since the recording has started, I'll let people know that I'm filling in for Sean today. We did not have a meeting last week due to a U.S. holiday, and we will not have a meeting next week due to another U.S. holiday. Mike in the chat already put a link to his discussion post that he made for GitHub PR and code review. Is there anything else we wanted to discuss about that in the meeting?
No, just that I know that from the discussion back on June 13th that I had some action items to evaluate some GitHub features specifically around code owners and how it treats assignments that would match our use case for TianoCore. So I have not completed that task yet. I'll hopefully come back since we're not going to meet next week, but maybe in 2 weeks I'll have an update and I can add my findings to the discussion.
Okay, sounds good. There were some open-ended questions, I think, in that discussion related to how or exactly how the process was going to work. Is that what you're talking about there, or is that just for assigning people to the reviews for the PRs and stuff like that? Because there was another time we were talking about whether or not we were going to do a peer squash strategy or allow rebase or maybe be flexible and allow a maintainer to choose and that kind of stuff. Is that still kind of an open or?
Yeah, I think the approach that is the one that from the consensus from the meeting a couple weeks ago of the one we want to explore the most is we still support a patch series, but we want to be potentially more flexible on how we assign reviewers and maintainers, with use of the code owners as the way to do that. Which would do the assignment at the scope of the entire PR, and then the individual reviewers and maintainers could choose to provide review comments at the entire PR scope or at individual commit scopes. That would be up to them based on what they want to provide comments on. So that would leave the selection based upon the assigned reviewers and maintainers. The piece that was not clear from 2 weeks ago that requires some investigation is how do we know when the review is complete, given that we may have a requirement for maintainers from different packages to provide a GitHub approval for different portions of the full PR if it's broken into multiple commits. And that's the piece I want to make sure that we can at least map our existing assignments of review and maintainer responsibilities into the GitHub process around code owners. So if we can successfully do that and preserve that concept of getting the appropriate number of reviewers approvals automatically such that the PR can go into the approved state once the required set of maintainers or reviewers have completed their work, then we'll be able to map this into that existing GitHub flow style PR process.
Okay. And is it still going to work the way that it will be a group of maintainers, not individual maintainers, right? So like you would need someone from like the MDE module package group to approve the PR, but not necessarily specific people, right? Just to give that vote.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's and I think the interesting thing that'll be for discussion amongst the whole community on the updated process is whether or not an approval from only a reviewer of a single package is sufficient to approve that PR, or do we need an approval from the maintainers, one of the maintainers, for it to be considered approved? And so if we relax the rule and say if it's any maintainer or reviewer accepts it, approves it, then that portion is approved. If we want to be more strict and say it has to be a maintainer, then the team you would assign for review capability would only be the list of maintainers, and we'd have to figure out how to get the additional reviewers informed that there's a PR that's for them to also look at, but they don't have approval capabilities, right? That's the nuance there that we'll have to discuss to see if we want to make reviewers basically equivalent in capabilities from an approval perspective for code review as a maintainer, and then maybe maintainers are the only ones that can actually hit the push label, saying that, okay, now that I see everything is in the approved state and I see who did it, then it can go into the get pushed into the back into the main branch.
Okay. I know at least in ADO, you can set a specific group as required, and then you can have another group be notified, but they don't meet the requirement for the other group. So maybe that's also in GitHub.
Okay. Yeah, that's why my main task is to review the capabilities of code owners, and I was going to use just a Scratch repository with some of our community members in some different as individuals and in some made up team names just to see what's possible.
Okay. Did anyone have any questions about that or any follow-up for that topic? Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, if not, the next thing that I see there's a to-do for is on CodeQL. We wanted to get a comparison point between that and Coverity. It looks like that's assigned to Sean though, so that won't have an update until after the not the next meeting, but the following one. He might have an update on that, but I doubt it because he's returning just before that. So I'll leave that as an open item. Was there any comments or questions about that item in general that maybe we could collectively answer, or do we just want to wait and get the results on that?
I'd suggest we wait and get the results because I think that we need to discuss all the options. I think we have Coverity as the preferred one from previous discussions, so we need to do kind of the pros and cons of each.
Okay. Yeah, and I think we've started enabling Coverity in some GitHub repos already, but I think Sean might want to prepare that data to present it back. So that one I'll leave open. The other item I see is containerized builds for CI and development. I don't see Oliver here. I think he was the main one leading that work. And I took a look at the repo and didn't see any substantial updates in the last 2 weeks. Is there anything we want to talk about here related to that, or anything that we need to put in the notes, or do we want to move on?
Does anybody know like the current status on that? Because I know I'm getting questions about moving to newer Ubuntu from several people that I'm discussing this with. So I'm just curious what this overall status is.
I think I'll leave a note to Oliver as part of the meeting minutes and see if in the discussion area maybe he can give us an update. We have, if you look in that repo, there's one person from Microsoft, Chris Fernald, that's also looking at this. So I can also check with him and see if he has an update as well and tell him to respond there.
Okay. And the overall intent here is not only to use this containerized method for CI, but also for developers for their development environments. If they want to use that container mechanism, they can use that as well, correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay. So then that would also require some updates to our wiki documentation on setting up development environments.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to talk a bit about it to see if we wanted different types of images for different activities, or if we just lump everything together. Because there's things like for example, Doxygen that you might want to run to generate documentation, but that's a pretty rare use case. But so do we want to include something like Doxygen in the main container image, or do we want that to be like a special documentation image or something? And probably like other tools like that, like things that you would kind of run for specific scenarios, but not all the time for development. Okay.
Yeah, the only other thing I noticed, and it's probably once again a question for Oliver, is if you look at the Docker configuration file, it looks like it's just pulling in the latest version of all the tools. It doesn't specify a specific version. Is there an intent to configure that Docker image so that it does specify a specific version so that we see pull requests to move to a newer version? So it's just that image is always exactly the same until there's a PR to upgrade the Docker image?
Okay. And you're talking about like the versions of the components that the Docker image includes, right?
Correct, like the different compilers and
Yeah.
I think it just does latest. It doesn't specify a specific version.
Yeah, I think we've been bitten enough by that we it almost should be a requirement for us to lock on the versions at this point. Because in both Python, right now we can't upgrade off Python 3.9 because it breaks RCI. We also weren't able to upgrade our spelling check plugin because it completely started just throwing tons of errors everywhere. And so I think that, and there's been other cases too. So it just seems to me like we really should try to lock on to things and do like controlled updates to new versions.
Yeah, I think the intent is still to move to newer versions as fast as possible. We don't want to be sitting behind for no reason, but I think we want to make sure that we have a PR where we're able to evaluate the new version before we commit to it.
Yes, exactly. Okay, I think we covered that enough for what we can do in this meeting. So I'll move on to the next topic. This one is one that I was wondering about, and it's the VS 2019 to 2022 update. Where did we land on that? For Tiano Core, obviously. I don't remember. Was that something that Sean said he was going to take on, or was there someone else in the community that was going to do that update?
I thought I said there were some pieces missing in Visual Studio 2022 that he was waiting for them to update.
Well, yeah, I think that may have been the RC tool that's like the resource compiler or whatever. That they did fix. So if that is the problem, that should no longer be a blocker.
And I thought he said there wasn't a container image for the VS22 tools yet, and that was something. I don't know if that was the RC or that was just it was waiting on, but I didn't think there was a way to run it in a container without some newer pieces coming.
I think that it was all related to the RC tool, was my understanding. If you're talking about, are you talking about like Azure hosted VM images with it?
Right.
Yeah, those are good now. So the way that worked is we had to actually, if you look in Tiano Core, they moved Windows latest to VS 2022, which is the Windows 2022 image. And because of that, we were still using VS 2019 in Tiano Core, so we had to basically fix the VM image to the Windows 2019 image.
Right.
So I think the best practice that we've found is, again, not going to Windows latest. Always just set it to the version that you want to match your compiler, and then upgrade it when you're ready to upgrade the compiler. So whenever we're ready to do the 2022 update, we just need to change the Windows 2019 image to Windows 2022, and that will have VS 2022 in it. VS 2019 will not be there anymore. It doesn't keep both. And once we're on that Windows 2022 image, they do update the tools pretty frequently in there. So Windows 2022 is not like a fixed image. They update it like weekly or whatever. There's always like minor tweaks and updates they're making, but it will always have the VS 2022 compiler in it, along with just various updates for security and stuff like that.
So when I was looking at, I was having very similar issues with the VS, even for 2019. I think it was like 16 or 17 versions that when you go back and download the old versions, just the compiler and linker, the standalone version that Sean pointed me to, there's like something like 16 versions. So is that another thing? Do we really need to move to the, every time you build? I thought, Kenny, I thought you were looking at reproducibility issues, right? If you keep changing the tools, but the tools are literally changing every, 2
Yeah.
weeks, whatever, right? That's kind of a problem.
Well, there's two elements to that question. One is theoretically there could be an update, for example, an automatic update to 2022 image that
Right.
breaks us, right? That would be catastrophic for us. If we don't have any way to manage the version of 2022 and there's an update to the 2022 image that then breaks our firmware builds, we're kind of stuck until we like roll back to something. So the other element then is really build reproducibility. So for example, if we have our quarterly releases that we do, so our stable tags, and we say that we validated our stable tag with the community at a specific, set of compilers for GCC and for Visual Studio and perhaps Clang and Xcode in the future for what our validation set is, we better be able to document the exact version that we validated against. And furthermore, somebody 2 years from now that goes and pulls that stable tag, they should be able to figure out how to install the same set of tools that release was validated on. So I think not only just documenting what the specific version is a critical requirement for our release process, and then instructions on how to reproduce that build environment for reproducible builds for future pulls of that same release is another important feature.
So you're saying the CI would continuously update and roll with the latest Visual Studio changes, but for the release stable tag, we'd want to lock in and make sure we have a reproducible set of tools that we would freeze that, right?
Well, at a minimum, we want to document what the version is we validated with. It may be considered what is the latest version at the time that the release is made, but we need to be able to document what specific version that is, such that somebody who pulls the code later can go and pull that exact version of the tools.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize that this is not changing anything, right? We've already been doing this. So like right now we're on Windows 2019 and that's not steady.
Right.
So it's not really changing. The one thing to note though is you can get all the versions. And they're all anytime that you build in the pipeline, it puts at the very beginning of the pipeline, it puts the image version that you're building against. And if you click on the link, you can see everything that's in that image. So for example, right now, I just went to one of our latest pipelines in Tiano Core for Windows 2019, and this is the image information for that image. So maybe an improvement we can make to the stable tag process is we put these links or this information in them.
Right.
I just put it in the chat, and that gives us the exact versions of everything. So it's completely reproducible. We just have to say that that was what we used at that time to build.
Right. And that's great. And as long as those same links provide the links to the download of the tools that you can go and reproduce that version, then we're good. If it's just the version information, then you'd have to figure out how to reconstruct that combination yourself.
I only see the text difference. It does give us the version of everything, but it doesn't. Or maybe I'm not clicking on the right in the chat here.
It gives you cached Docker images. If you go down to the very bottom, there's a thing that says like cached Docker images, and I think we could save the Docker image if we wanted to. I haven't tried that myself, but it seems like it's what they're intending to be possible there.
So instead of hunting down all these millions of versions of everything, then just go grab the Docker image.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's a hell of a lot easier. It saves you a ton of work.
Yes. Yeah. Save this page and then, put the Docker image in a directory alongside it. So you have everything together whenever we do a stable tag build.
This is actually a great topic for this forum. I agree with your observation, Michael. We've not been capturing this information or providing this information about how to reproduce the build environment used to produce a stable tag. But I think it's an opportunity for us to make it better, at least get it documented, and then have a reasonable path to reproduce that same environment if needed later on.
Yep. I'm just capturing a note here so I can put it in the meeting notes to do this on stable tag.
So you're saying in that second link, the assets, is that it says source code, but I'm not sure a source code of what. That's not the Docker VM then, right?
I don't know what that source code goes to. We could see.
I'm sorry. So I didn't see a Docker image in either of the two links in the.
Oh,
on the
on the very bottom of the first page, there's a thing that says cache Docker images. I think we'd have to just figure out how to get those images that it's using.
Oh, I see. They're not live linked. This is just the tag. And
yeah.
You have to go back and dig the tag out of it. So these are saved along with the CI or in an Azure somewhere. These are not going to. These cache images aren't going to disappear at some point.
Well, they might, but they might, but I think that's why whenever we do the stable tag, we need to try to find a way to get
to save these in our
to save these. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, I would prefer saving the VM images than rather hunting down those 30 million things you have above. Chasing down every one of those, right?
Well,
so much easier just to.
Yeah, I mean, you have a lot of detailed information there, at least at the
right.
minimum.
Well, I mean, but still, hunting down all those images to go get them again would be painful, right? So,
yes,
saving the Docker image. If all we have to do is download those, there's only 4. Then.
And I think maybe we should run through that process at some point, like
right,
and verify that we can recreate a build. And see what exactly it takes. But
right. And the other thing that's, this is the level of detail that I think is you're guaranteed to be reproducible if you have all this information, reproduce the Docker image. But I think we know in practice, if we look at, the Visual Studio, for example, the Visual Studio compiler updates, very few of those probably affect code generation. So, there may be, 100, tens of updates to Visual Studio that never affect the code generation of our firmware code. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So doesn't that create a lot of thrash on the CI if literally the tools are changing every 2 weeks? I mean, wouldn't it be better just to say, I saw for Visual Studio 2019, at least for the community versions, the free versions, there's like 16 versions for that generation of 2019. I don't know if they'll have additional security fixes coming out later, but if we just latched onto one and like Mike was saying, if there's no change to the actual binary output that gets generated, then why are we burning a lot of CI time rebuilding? I mean, we have so many different tool chain sets, having each one of them roll every 2 weeks is kind of an additional variable and additional thrash that I'm not even sure we really need, right?
Well, this is all pretty automatic. It's just the VM image gets swapped underneath us. So Microsoft would have already validated these VM images to make sure they work, and then we're just using them to build.
But I mean, if you have all these different variations of the tools changing, then we have to go rerun the build and see if it builds, right?
Oh, well, we do. I don't think I can't think of a time that this has ever caused us a build problem. Like the VM image changing. The build problems come from all the other weird stuff we throw on top of it, like our Python modules and like even Python itself and all these other things. But I think these OS images have been pretty stable. Like I don't think we've had VS19, just randomly start failing.
Right, but Harry, you're not wrong from a pure CI process perspective. You change anything, you want to verify it before you commit to it, right?
Right.
The part that's a bit confusing here is that we're using Azure pipelines as our build infrastructure, build agents, and they're choosing to manage their build agents in this way. And in which case, when they update something in the tool profile within one of their build agents, We don't notice that, and so we're not automatically kicking off a revalidation of all of our firmware code against that image change. So we don't actually run additional bandwidth for our firmware testing. It's just the next PR that gets processed
That's when we
for
run the
firmware
build
code
again. Okay.
will then be building against a different version of all the tools that were updated. And if it fails, then of course then there's two variables there, right? There's was it the OS image or was it the code change, right?
Yeah.
And by experience so far, we've not seen a tool change from an OS image break us in any way right now. Okay. Maybe we've been lucky. Maybe that just isn't a testament to how well these OS images are verified before they're deployed by Azure pipelines.
And there are certain dependencies we can control. So, for example, we were just you could kind of say we were broken by an OS image update in a way, because we were specifying that we wanted to be on the latest version of Python 3. And we didn't specify what specific subversion or anything like that. And that's whenever we got upgraded from 3.9 to 3.10 or whatever it was, and the tar file module broke us. Now that was Python that broke us, not the OS image, but that's because we didn't control our Python dependency. So even though Python is in the OS image, we're still able to control what version we want to use. And that's why even today we're using Python 3.9 through the Python version to, that we have in our YAML files. So we can control some of the stuff that matters to us, but I just don't think a lot of this stuff really matters. It's probably kind of good that they keep up with security updates on most of these other random components that don't really affect our builds anyway. So that is that. I took a note to try to capture this information in the stable tag about what environment it was built against. And then it might be a good idea to run through trying to recreate a build that happened on a VM as part of a pipeline to see if we can recreate those in practice.
So it's got all the .NET and the redistributable underlying components for the compiler and the OS and SDK, right? Those are typically the ones when there's a security update, right? They're the ones that end up getting pushed up.
Yeah, and things like NuGet, right? Because we do use NuGet now, and because it's connecting and pulling down binaries, you sometimes get updates there. And Chocolatey is another one that I think is kind of an important security update.
Yeah, PowerShell is another one. You guys are up at 7 point, the latest PowerShell looks like there, so that's good. There's just a ton of things in here. I didn't see Maven in here anywhere. Which assembler are we using?
Maven 2.15.05 is our official assembler right now.
I was just looking for it in the list. I couldn't find it.
I think we have to install that on top of the base image, right? Azure doesn't have Maven in it by default. We have to install it as on top of that image.
Yeah, but like Python and all these other things, right? Oh, you're saying it can't be in the VM image. You have to go install it on top of the.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's nice about these OS images is that there's a whole bunch of pre-installed tools that can save you setup time for starting your CI job if you use the ones that are there. If you have additional tools you need, you take a little extra CI time to install those additional tools. Or if you need to fall back to an older version of one, you have to, I think, install that older version and make sure that's the default one used by your build process.
So that means that maybe it's the second image. This is still not a complete list of all the tools used, right? So things like Maven that are installed on top of the VM image, you still need to also get those to really reproduce the build then, right?
Yeah. And that's in the YAML files that tell you.
It's in the YAML files. Okay.
Yeah.
So that plus the YAML file, what's in there? Would that tell
plus
you?
The pip modules.
Plus the pip. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's still not. I'm saying it's still not complete. You still need to hunt down a few more items there, right, to figure out what's actually in the build, right? So. what tools were used to build it. Okay.
Yeah, it'd be useful to have a script to do that inventory, right, Michael? That would be the inventory of all tools used when we kick
Ye-
off a build.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be nice to have. Um, I think I'll have to check. I think there might be something that we're using that kind of does that. Um, but I can follow up on that. But yeah, it would be nice to have a script to output all of those. The other thing that you get into is even what build plugins you're using. Because within the build system, at least the Stewart build system, you can have various types of plugins, right? Like helper plugins, build plugins that run pre-build, post-build. Those might do patching as well. And so you have to kind of capture, I would think, even your build plugins and what you're using there.
Yeah, hopefully
But
your straw hash of the version that you're building against is effectively that one, right? It's like you
yeah,
pulled the specific ones. That's because that's the YAML files are source code, the pip requirements are source code in our repo, and then the plugins for
yeah.
Stewart are also source code in our repo.
And all the submodules would be there as well that we were
Yep.
using. So. Okay, an update on we were talking about something that reminded me about the Python issue. So I have a Bugzilla where I've been tracking the Python updates. If anyone's interested in those, I can put a link to that in the chat as well. But let me get that real quick. There. But the current update is that they accepted the PR that fixes the issue in the tar file module, and we're waiting to get release information on it and to see which version it gets backported to of Python. So so I'll see if they add an update on there. Okay, so they're moving it to 3.10 and 3.11, it looks like, in the PR. This is the PR for it over in the C Python project. So once that gets picked up in 3.10 or 11, whichever one we want to move to, around 3. They aren't going to move it to 3.9, it looks like. So we're going to have to move off 3.9, but we can move to 3.10 or 11 and get the fix, which is where we want to be anyways. We just couldn't get there because of this problem. Are there any questions about that? I think so. The person who contributed that fix was Chris Fernald. He's in my team at Microsoft. I think he was planning to follow up and update Tiano Core to 3.10 or 11 once the fix is in. So the plan is I'll assign him to the Bugzilla, and he'll make that change for us. All right. Are there any other opens? So I think I captured most of the things that I had laying around from prior meetings.
I have one open about EDK2 base tools as a process. I was looking at the README and it shows how to contribute. But if we want to request a new official release for the new release of a pip module, how do we do that?
I would have to go check and see. That would be a question for Sean. I think right now there's a person in our team that's taken over that process, but I'm not sure what the official process is to get them to do a release or if others can do a release. So I'll leave that as an open for Sean to answer once he gets back.
Okay. Yeah, because if I look at like our pip requirements.txt, it does list EDK2 base tools equal like 0.1.17 for a specific version. I'm curious is if we get a PR approved, is there a new PIP release version that's automatically generated? And that the way we move forward is to update PIP requirements? Or is there an additional thing that needs to be done on the EDK2 base tool side? That's the more detailed version of that question.
Okay. Yeah, I in EDK2 PyTool extensions, I guess that's the one I'm more used to being updated and us updating to. We have someone go do a release, and it's not updated on every build, and then we update to that version, and then they decide was the release backward compatible or not. So do they need to roll the major version or just like a patch version on it? So they kind of make the decision about what version to move to as the next release. But I'm not sure on base tools. So like I said, I took a note on that one.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other opens for today? One that I had that came back to mind was we had that discussion a few weeks ago about library overrides, and I think Andrew Fish was here at the time, and we spent quite a bit of time talking about how best to have kind of default library instances that are pointed to, and then make those easy to integrate. What do you suggest we do for progressing that discussion? Put it in the discussion area here, or bring it up as an RFC on the list, or what do we want to do for next steps on that one?
I'd suggest an RFC or a separate discussion.
Okay, I don't think we have my I didn't feel we had our thoughts kind of substantiated enough to form a RFC that would get great feedback, just because it's kind of so ambiguous right now in terms of how we want to handle it. So maybe we'll start that in the discussion area and then see if we end up somewhere that we can kind of put together an RFC to get more feedback on. Okay, are there any other opens? All right, if not, then we'll stop here. Thank you for joining. And just a reminder, we don't have a meeting next week. So we'll see you the week after that. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Everybody.
Bye.